Nicole's got everybody up. Woohoo! You don't have to adjust your monitors. I'm not Frank. All right, let's open with a word of prayer. Most gracious God, we give you thanks for your Spirit present to us everywhere and always, and for the promise that Jesus has made to us, that the Spirit indeed is the one that intercedes on our behalf. We ask you to be present to us as we come to your word this morning and give us discerning minds, hearts, and spirits to what you have to share with us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. So, and I was kind of bouncing in and out last week. So I think what's really important is that there is a definite pivot that takes place at the opening of chapter 13 of John. And we kind of knew that this was coming because you had that kind of curious incident where the Greeks who were in town for the Passover approached Jesus's disciples to say, we would see Jesus. And when he's told that, Jesus makes the observation that the hour has then come. And I don't know how much Frank has talked about this already, this idea of the hour or the time. Did you all talk about that? Has Frank spoken about that with you? I'm going to just keep spinning in my chair because it's a lot of fun. Plus, no free rides. All right. Have we talked about the hour? Okay, so let's just go back for real quick, because this is a concept that's really important to John. Go back to chapter 2. The wedding at Cana. And you'll see, what does Jesus, first of all, I don't recommend that anybody speak to their mother this way. Libby has a great story to tell about the time that this particular story was taught in Sunday school, and her children addressed her as woman. Let's just say it didn't go well. But anyway, Mary, being the good Jewish mother that she is, wants her son to fix the problem that they have at the wedding when they run out of wine. And Jesus says, no, my hour has not yet come. Now, because he is a good Jewish son, he does what his mother tells him. But this idea of the hour not yet arriving, right? That this is kind of a very important concept to John. And you know, the great thing about John's gospel is that it does have this a little bit more of a kind of a cosmic, I mean, that's what the prologue does, right? The prologue of chapter 1, starting off by saying, instead of, Mark, who doesn't even fool around with a birth narrative, right? Mark just jumps right in. The good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, bam, we're at the River Jordan with John, right? Luke has this lovely birth narrative that we're going to be inundated with starting tomorrow until the end of December. And then Matthew kind of, it's so interesting because Matthew's birth narrative has way more to do with Moses than it has to do with, like, Luke's birth narrative is a tribute or a variation on a Greek kind of mythological structure, right? The story that Luke tells in the birth narrative is very akin to the kinds of legends that get told about emperors in the Greek Empire. Emperors are often said to be born of virgins. They are called Son of God. Similar kind of language, and Luke picks up that kind of that archetype for his birth narrative, whereas Matthew is picking up Jewish archetypes. He's talking about the narrative about Jesus's birth in many ways with the hostile monarch who engages in the wholesale slaughter of infants is intended to evoke Pharaoh and to evoke the killing of Jewish boys in Egypt, right? But John doesn't even start there. John starts, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And suddenly you're like, okay, so we're opening the aperture really wide with John, right? And so this idea of the hour is not, so there are the two concepts of time, Greek concepts of time. You have kairos and you have chronos. And chronos is, come on in, Ardith. Chronos is what's on my wrist. Chronos is what's on the wall. Chronos dictates what time we start worship this morning. But kairos is what Jesus is talking about here. The hour, the time. The time has come, right? And it's a moment in which, and the hour becomes really complicated, right? Because before, in chapter 3, when Jesus is talking with Nicodemus, you can flip over there, and you get, the thing that is on all the signs in the end zones about God so loving the world, and not condemning the world, but the world might be saved through him. But you go a little further down, and Jesus also invokes another image from the Old Testament, that of being lifted up, just as the serpent was lifted up in the desert, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. That's, by the way, that's a reference to Numbers, where serpents are biting and killing people in the wilderness from Egypt to the Promised Land, and God instructs Moses to construct a symbol that we're all familiar with if we spent any time around a hospital or medicine, the pole with the snake. And that symbol is, they're supposed to look to the symbol and be healed of their affliction. And so in a similar way, Jesus is likening himself. He'll be lifted up, right? But John 13 is where we start to move into an understanding that this time, this hour that has arrived, is not going to look the way people were hoping or thinking it would look, right? And that's signaled right away at the beginning of chapter 13. Would somebody just read the first 3 verses of chapter 13? Okay.
It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God.
Good. So we set the whole scene, right? The very first verse, that he knew that his hour had come. So, what happened at Cana, the hour has not yet come. We're here. It's time. And immediately we're made aware that the hour that has come for him to depart the world and go to the Father is going to be complicated, because in the very next verse, we have the Satan, the devil, prompting Judas, son of, to betray him. Right? So this hour is going to involve betrayal. Love and betrayal, right? Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end, followed hard on the heels by betrayal. And it's very important the way that this unfolds, the way that this particular, John's particular account of what happens in this room unfolds, because you get a lot of outward signs of love in this room that includes, in a way, it's very interesting that John chooses to tell us about Judas here, because Judas won't leave until verse 30. Judas is in the room for everything that comes between, it comes in the next 30 verses. And there's a lot, right? So let's dive into some of this symbolism. So the first thing that, will somebody take it from verse 4 and to verse 11.
So he got up from the supper table, took off his clothes, and wrapped a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a bowl and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel he was wrapped in. He came to Simon Peter. "Master," said Peter, "what's this? You washing my feet?" "You don't understand yet what I'm doing," replied Jesus, "but you'll know in good time." "I'm not going to have you washing my feet," said Peter, "never." "If I don't wash you," replied Jesus, "you don't belong to me." "All right then, Master," said Simon Peter, "but not only my feet, wash my hands and my head as well." Someone who has washed," said Jesus to him, "doesn't need to wash again except for their feet. They are clean all over, and you are clean, but not all of you." Jesus knew, you see, who was going to betray him. That's why he said, "You are not mine."
All right. So the very first thing that Jesus does, do you all know about the cultural practice of foot washing? How this works? So I'm looking around, seeing lots of closed-toed shoes, right? Not a feature of first century Palestinian wardrobe. Sandals, and no pavement. So pretty much, I'll just tell a little story. I did a wedding last month in Velarde for Devin Hoffman. It was great. It was really cool. And Devin, how many of you know Devin? So what I'm about to say will not surprise you. Devin decided to get married in a field up there in Velarde. And to be fair, it was the property behind the home that he shares with his wife now. And I made the mistake, because it was still fairly warm, of wearing my sandals to the rehearsal. And my feet were filthy when I got home, because when you wear sandals in New Mexico in the dirt, your feet get really dirty. And interestingly enough, the landscape of New Mexico is not all that different than the landscape around Jerusalem. Very similar features, dry, arid, and so you would have pretty dirty feet. So common kind of cultural custom when you enter a home is to have, and this is important, the servant, the slave of the house, wash a guest's feet. So it would not be the host's responsibility to do that his or herself, although patriarchal culture mostly his self. It would be that duty would be given to the slave of the house. And so the fact that Jesus does this is very, very important. It's why Peter resists, right? And it's interesting, because this is almost, in the synoptics, you have this very important exchange where Jesus is asking, "Who do people say that I am?" And Peter says, "You are the Messiah, you are the Son of God." And Jesus said, gold star answer, way to go. And then Jesus starts talking about dying, and Peter's like, "Whoa, hold on there, Jesus. This is not the Messiah I was looking for." And Jesus kind of calls him out on it. And this is basically John's version of that moment. Here's a moment where Jesus is signaling what it looks like, right? What his leadership looks like, what God's love looks like. It doesn't look like high and mighty. It looks like low on your knees and serving those around you as would a slave. And Peter rightly objects to that because that's not the Messiah that he has in mind. That's not royal, that's not high, right? And it's interesting what's going to happen next. So there's this weird exchange about bathing, and God love Peter. I think that the only reason I can have any confidence as a Christian is that no matter how much I screw up, Peter's always like one step ahead of me. He is like Mr. Enthusiasm too. He's just like, it's no surprise that the guy who jumps off of who while at the end of the book, he's naked and fishing, which fine, whatever, it's a hot day, but feels the need to put on his clothes before he jumps in the water to swim to the beach to see what he thinks is Jesus there at the very end. Spoiler alert, right? But it's not surprising that Mr. Enthusiasm, Peter, wouldn't stop at just having his feet washed, right? It's oh, you got to wash everything. And Jesus is like, that's not really what this is about. How many of you have participated in a foot washing? Okay. And how many of you have been invited to participate in a foot washing and have declined? Right. All the reasons why we want to decline foot washing are all the reasons why it's important. And it's not to shame anybody or to guilt anybody. It's just to say, and I've had people say, you don't understand, you haven't seen my feet. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. But that impulse is exactly what this is about, right? And it's what I think it's part of what Peter's about too. It's not just, oh, don't demean yourself, Jesus. It's also like, yeah, I don't want you, this person that I follow, that is my teacher, that I call master or Lord, seeing this part of me that isn't just dirty, but probably doesn't smell too great. And, feet are weird, right? I mean, there's some weird looking feet out there. And that impulse to hide our feet from whoever is part of what I think is important about what happens here. Because, and it's why, okay, I say this and I always get pushback for it, so I'm gonna apologize ahead of time because, and I need to stay curious and not judgmental, and there's a little bit of judgment what I'm about to say, but as much as I appreciate the sentiment behind hand washing as a substitute for foot washing, it's not the same thing. It doesn't involve the kind of vulnerability that foot washing requires. And yet I think that act of vulnerability is at the heart of discipleship.
I would say that's all 20th century stuff, they were walking around in open toes, everybody saw everybody's feet.
Right.
It was a matter of dirt in those days.
Right. And for the same reason that, in Asian culture, people take off shoes,
Right.
You don't want to track that stuff into your house. It serves a very, hygienic function.
Well, I think also there weren't good toilet facilities, so you walked in some of that with your feet.
Right.
But the other piece is also, at least in Asian culture, the bottom of your feet is really nasty.
Right.
And you don't sit with your feet sticking out like this.
Oh, interesting.
And other people see your feet.
Right.
And that is really offensive.
Well, and here's the interesting, okay, so this is my ADHD brain. Sorry, y'all. I'm not as prepared as Frank. I mean, I did the reading and everything, and I read John. Yeah. But this idea of it's not, I don't think it's a coincidence that feet is a euphemism in Hebrew scripture for more private parts of the body, right? Like in the Isaiah vision in the temple where the seraphim are covering their they're covering their feet. It's not what they're not. It's not down here. When Ruth is instructed to uncover Boaz's feet, that's not what she's uncovering, right? But it's not a mistake because there is, again, vulnerability associated with that, right? It's the most vulnerable part of a person. And so the idea that Jesus would wash, in this case, actually his disciples' actual feet, is still a sign that where God meets us is not at our best or the version of ourselves that we want everybody else to see. In fact, the part that God is most interested in accessing is the part we're most inclined to hide.
The other thing I think about foot washing is when someone's washing your feet, they're like crawling in front of you. They're not like standing up, leaning over.
Right.
They
Nobody
get
says
down on their knees and they're washing their feet, which is a whole different dynamic than what we're used to.
right.
And I find it very powerful to be doing that.
Yes.
Alone crawling around.
Yes.
Right. No, and that's, we're gonna get to that because let's keep going because this is where Jesus goes next. Somebody read 12 to 20 for me, please.
After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for this is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example that you also should do as I have done to you. Very truly, I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor the messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do. I am speaking of all I know whom I have chosen, but it is to fulfill the scripture. The one who ate my bread has bended his heel against me. I tell you this now before it occurs, so that when it does occur, you may believe that I am he. Very truly, I tell you, whoever receives one whom I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me."
Great, thank you. So the pattern of discipleship then is set by Jesus, who says, so it's not just, so we just said, okay, the place where God meets us is in our most vulnerable. Now Jesus is saying, and the place where you are to meet one another. That's actually, I think that's what makes a foot washing in church so much harder. Like I'm a little more comfortable with God seeing my mess than I am with y'all seeing my mess.
Well, God already saw your mess.
No, right. Like I can pretend all I want, but I can hide pretty well from everybody else.
Right, but you can't hide it from God. He's already seen it, so.
But the pattern of community, because he says, you do this with each other.
That's right.
Right? So it isn't just you do this for everybody else. It's like, no, the community is built upon this very vulnerable, and I've been riffing on this because I love it so much. So I was listening to this, and I will give you the clean version of this. I was listening to this great conversation between Brene Brown and Brett Goldstein. Brett Goldstein is the writer who also plays the character of Roy Kent on the Apple TV Plus show Ted Lasso. And Roy is great. And it was this fantastic conversation that took place at Austin City Limits Music Festival. But she got to talking to this actor about his love of the Muppets. And because she thought it was so funny. Here's this guy and he plays this gruff character and he's like, she's like, what is your deal with the Muppets? And he says, okay, well, this is ridiculous. I'm gonna explain the Muppets to you. He said, but you know, the great thing about the Muppets are us, he says. And Kermit isn't a very good host, and Fozzie isn't a very good comedian, and Miss Piggy isn't a very good singer, but they love it. And they're a family. And the joy that they have is what is important about that. And I love that idea of like, it's not about being the best. It's not about excellence. It's about this family and this joy that you take in doing this thing that you love, right? And to do that requires a certain amount of vulnerability. It requires giving your gift, offering your feet, even though you know they are not pristine, right? In the understanding that actually that's where the goods are. That's where the joy is. That's where the connection is found. Not in the pretense, but in the messy reality.
Requires being open rather than hidden from your people, you know?
Right.
That's what it.
Right. And requires kind of saying, being able to say, I'm struggling with this, you know, or this is not good. And it's hard, you know, it's as hard as taking your shoes off and having somebody wash your feet. I think that's why it's such a powerful symbol. All right. Other thing that I want to point out, because as I was saying, at the front end of the chapter, and I'm very aware of the time, thank you. You're great. No, but I saw him kind of look at his watch and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Keep going, Matt, you got a whole nother chapter.
I saw you.
That's true. We already know, John has already told us about Judas. And it's pretty clear that Jesus knows. And he washes Judas's feet. I think it's really important to remember that. And what's even more important is what happens next. So can I get somebody to read from 21 to 30?
After saying this, Jesus was troubled in his spirit. He told them why. I'm telling you the solemn truth, he said. One of you will betray me. The disciples looked at each other in shock, wondering who he could be talking about. One of the disciples, the one Jesus especially loved, was reclining at the table close beside him. Simon Peter motioned to him and asked who it was he was talking about. So, leaning as he was very close beside Jesus, he asked him, who is it, Master? It's the one I'm going to give this piece of bread to, said Jesus, who I've dipped it in this dish. So he dipped the piece of bread and gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. After the bread, the Satan entered into him. Do it quickly, won't you? Said Jesus to him. None of the others at the table knew what he meant, because Judas kept the common purse. Some were thinking that he meant, buy what you need to eat for the festival, or that was to be, or to give something to the poor. So when Judas had taken the bread, he went out at once. It was night.
So this act, I mean, the whole kind of thing with the beloved disciple is, it's just weird. Ask Frank about that. But what I think what's important is this act of dipping the bread and giving it to someone. That is a tender act, right? That's a loving act. And Jesus knows what's coming, And that's what I'm saying, like this whole kind of thing, the fulcrum of it is love and betrayal. Love and betrayal. And the betrayal never precludes the love. It's never a barrier. Jesus never says, you know what? Never mind, Judas, no soup for you. Washes his feet, gives him the bread, continues to act with grace, even when he knows what's coming. And then you get very common imagery of John, makes a point of saying when Judas went out and it was night, Judas goes out. Where does he go? He goes out into the dark. And John has very much been trafficking in images of light and dark from the very beginning, right? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome. I am the light of the world. Judas is going into the dark. That is where the betrayal will ultimately take place. And then we get the new commandment. So would someone read 31 through 35?
Well, when he had gone out, Jesus said, now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me. And as I said to the Jews, so I now say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.
Right. So interesting, this first of all, the reaction to Judas's going out into the dark is curious, because Jesus says, now the Son of Man has been glorified. When you think of glory, what do you think of? What are common images of glory?
The light shining.
Light shining, ascension, right? Victory. Yeah, right? And now he's talking about glory in this moment of betrayal, in this moment of darkness. That God can be glorified in that is the difference between the power of the world, or the glorification of the world, and what God is capable of. It becomes really important as we go
There's
forward.
also that idea that, this is what's supposed to happen. This has been,
This is the way it's supposed to go.
right.
Yeah, and it's a curious, there's a lot that has been written, a lot of theology that's been done. I think that's definitely where John is. John has there's this characteristic of John's gospel in which it's all unfolding according to plan, right? Which, as a Presbyterian Reformed Christian, is very familiar. Yeah, well, yes, exactly. Except I have a real problem with that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not
I'm sure.
on board. What do you?
I was going to say, to me, it always means that Jesus and God are present together because he's doing God's will precisely.
Right.
And that's the presence of God, is he's always with you and glorifying his will.
Right.
And so
Glorifying, and by the degree of realization.
Sure. Great. Yes, yes. And I think a realization that I am more, the problem with predestination as a doctrine is that it often gets kind of turned into God as puppeteer, right? That God is pulling all the strings. It's not God that makes Judas do what he does, right? Now, assigning the Satan, in Hebrew literature, the Satan literally means the accuser. The Satan it's a legal role that is like the prosecution. Basically, the one who brings charges is the Satan, right? And so by invoking the Satan in this narrative, it's almost as though it's the world. And when I say the world, I don't mean creation. I mean like the world of the human construct that is ultimately corrupt, right? And it is bringing charges. The Satan is basically using, the accuser is using Judas as an agent of the world to bring charges against the Son of Man. And against that backdrop, you have this new commandment again: love and betrayal. Love and betrayal. Even as Judas goes out to the night and Jesus names the glorification that is to come, or that is actually has been glorified, is glorified in this, which is really kind of weird to think about. But it's funny, I'm kind of chuckling because, let's see, Rod and Ann and Brian and Terry and Barbara have already heard this morning's sermon about commandments, the great commandment. This new commandment, which is distinguished from the second great commandment. The second great commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus says, I give you a new commandment, to love one another as I am. The predicate is no longer the self. The predicate of the love that we are to share starts with Jesus. And how has Jesus loved them?
It's serving them.
This is what love looks like.
There's something now on
Yeah.
with regards to the love that neighbor as yourself. The question is not who is your neighbor, but what kind of neighbor are you?
Ah, right. Right. Exactly. Right. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. There's a great question that gets asked sometimes, and I always like it. It's funny that I would raise it on Reformation Day because I'm pretty sure Martin Luther would spit in my face for asking this question, but because it's a little works-based. But if it were illegal to be Christian, which it is not, would there be enough evidence to convict you? And the evidence of that, according to Jesus, is there enough evidence that you love one another for people to see that something else is going on than just being a good person, right?
That's one of the great conversion things later on in this time, is see how we love them.
Yes, look, these Christians, see how they love one another. Which, now I kind of say with a little bit of bitter irony, or you could even say on Reformation Day, because Libby's going to invoke it. I mean, we're going to celebrate the Reformation today, but we should do it with eyes wide open, knowing that it was the source of a lot of bloodshed and a lot of violence that Christians waged against one another, certainly in violation of what Jesus is talking about here, right? We need to be honest about that, that we haven't executed this perfectly.
Becky, can I add something?
Please.
Just kind of piggybacking on what you said. the question that I always heard was, are you your neighbor's keeper? No, you're your neighbor's neighbor, which is like,
That's great. Oh, I like that.
yeah.
Put that in my pocket. All right. Somebody, Simon Peter, once again, somebody read for us the end of the chapter from verse 36.
Well,
Thank you.
Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow after. Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the cock crows, you will have the night.
Pretty important, actually, some of the language that Peter uses here, right? And remember, laying down one's life has already been invoked, right? This is the language of the Good Shepherd from chapter 10. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for his sheep, right? So Peter, Mr. Enthusiasm, Peter, once again, I will lay down my life for you. What Jesus foretells his denial, but really it could be saying, he says, will you lay down your life for me? What's implied is, I am about to lay down my life for you. You're still not getting it, Peter. You still don't understand how this works. I just take so much comfort in Peter.
You know, I also identify with Peter at this point. My family's always on my case because conversation will go, something will happen, and then it'll go on to a different topic, and I'll come back 10 minutes later with
And you're like, yeah, Terry, we already covered that.
he has gone on to, I give you a new commandment. Then Peter comes back, wait, you're going, where?
What was the middle thing? You're going somewhere? Yes. Speaking of going somewhere, we're getting on. So I'm gonna go ahead and read this next section to verse 14. And really now what we get to, starting with chapter 14, and what we'll get for the next 3 chapters, 14, 15. Actually, 4 chapters, 14, 15, 16, and 17, is what are called the farewell discourses, right? From here on, with just a few, like there's a little bit of Philip and Thomas in here, but pretty much if you have a red letter Bible, it gets red letters for the next several chapters. Very long kind of discourse. But this first bit, I think, is important and greatly misunderstood. So Jesus says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and I will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way to the place where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will know my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied. Jesus said to him, okay, size my part, but have I been with you all this time, Philip, and you still do not know me? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. But if you do not, then believe me because of the works themselves. Very truly I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these, because I am going to the Father. I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If in my name you ask me for anything, I will do it. So there's a lot to unpack there. Starting with this whole thing of where are you going? And the idea of way. Because what ends up, I mean, later on, when you get to the book of Acts, right? And Saul of Tarsus is persecuting Jewish Christians, because that's basically where we're at that point in the story. Going up to synagogues, rounding up the people, the Jews in the synagogues who are naming Jesus as Christ, as anointed, as Messiah. They are described by the writer of Acts as people of the way. That's why my personalized license plate, by the way, says ONDWAY, on the way. I'm not from Chicago, but it's just the shortest way I could do it. But on the way could mean I'm on my way somewhere, but it also, for me, means that I'm supposed to be on the way of Christ, right? Which is different than typing something, a destination into Google and getting step-by-step directions. Instead, what is the way? By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. I am the way. Jesus has set the standard. He has provided us with the roadmap, with the blueprint, however you would choose your analogy, not as a recipe but as a way of life, a way of being in the world. And that way of being is marked by mutual love.
You were talking about the corruption of the world a while ago. There's human nature, you could call it, and this is the other half of human nature, really. I mean, you've got the good part that we all want more money, more stuff, but also you see a homeless guy that's really in bad shape, and your heart goes out. We've got both halves, and that's this chapter, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love is that you have two disciples in this exchange who cannot extract themselves from the literal meaning of what they're saying. And it's almost as though you want Jesus to say, bop them over the head with like a Nerf thing or whatever. It's like, it's a figure of speech. It's not an actual place in the sky, because in 2,000 years they're going to launch satellites up there and show you that there's not angels strumming on the clouds. It's just more space. It's a figure of speech. And then Philip, it's like, oh, show us the books. I have such I love Jesus for a lot of reasons, but I really love him for this because you can almost feel the frustration, right? I know that we all want to think of Jesus as totally mellow, he's super chill, but there's a part of me that's like Philip opens his mouth and I feel like Jesus just wants to go, face palm. Philip, how long have we been doing this? You've been with Philip. Let me go back to chapter 1. You were right there at the beginning, all right? You were there under the tree with John. We've been at this for a while. You still don't get it. But this idea, and this is what I want to touch on, because I think it's been greatly misused by the Christian church. No one comes to the Father except through me. Okay. So what does that mean? Does that mean if I don't follow all the strictures of the Christian community, if I don't confess the faith in the right way, or if I don't invite Jesus into my heart, or if I don't do the catechism, or whatever the tradition has as its criteria for entry into the community, if I don't do that, if I don't call myself a Christian, then I'm not in.
You just answered that question yourself.
What does Jesus say to Nicodemus after John 3:16? But he says, I didn't come into the world to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through me. So is it about, is coming to the Father about what, and this is, okay, I know this is a leading question, and it is Reformation Day, so I hope you all get this right. Let me put it this way, is communion with the Father, or to take it out of patriarchal imagery, is communion with God about what I do, or is it about what God has done to claim me? If it's about what I do, then no one comes to the Father except through me. Is a question of my doing the right thing in order to get in on the goods. But if no one comes to the Father except through me, is Jesus saying, listen, everything that's about to go down, everything that's already going down, Judas has gone out into the night, is not about you. And he'll say this later. We'll get there. Thankfully, it'll be Frank. But the very next chapter, Jesus is going to be really explicit. You didn't choose me. I chose you. And he says it earlier. He says, I know whom I have chosen. Right? He says it in John 3:16. God so loved the world. And actually, the Greek is the cosmos. And again, that goes back to what we were saying at the beginning with the prologue. This is a cosmic project that is at work here, that is unfolding here. And it is for the salvation of it all. I mean, Paul will use that same language later in his letters, right? He will talk about all in all. All means all. It doesn't mean just the parts that follow the plan. It means that God's intention is to save all of it. And that happens through Jesus. And your particular relationship to Jesus will characterize how you enter into that. But don't preclude the possibility that if the way of Jesus is the way of mutual love, that there may be people who don't explicitly confess Jesus who aren't on the way. Does that make sense? Plus, some of you don't know me that well. Some of you know me a little too well and know that, and are going to roll your eyes when I say this next part.
Still love you.
Yeah, thank you. And you're going to roll your eyes when I say this next part. This is not pie in the sky in the great by and by, y'all. This is not the way to something after. This is the way to the kingdom of God, Jesus has already said, is within you. And in the synoptics, it's right in front of you. It's all around you. This is about entering into that. If you want to enter into that, you enter into it in the way of Christ, which is the way of mutual self-giving love. That's it. That's how you get in on the goods. And the goods are really good. if you're a part of a community of mutual love and support. That's why I serve the church, because you need that. I need that.
How does he address those that reject that? I mean,
Well, he says you've condemned yourself, which, I just see enough evidence of it it doesn't mean that God ever stops loving you. This is the Barnian thing, right? This is the subjective appropriation of the objective reality makes an objective difference. Meaning,
Whoa.
yeah, I know, it's a big sentence. Meaning, I love my kids. Period. Full stop. End of sentence. My kids turn their back on me, and choose not to have a relationship with me. That's going to affect our relationship. It is not, however, going to make any difference in my love for them. Right? So the love, God has put his cards on the table in Jesus. God is all in. And there are people who opt out, and you see it all the time. And that's why I will say, this isn't about afterlife. Not only is it not about pie in the sky and the great by and by, it's also not about eternal fire and damnation. Because there are plenty of people who live in hell right now.
It's the same as that two halves of human nature,
Right.
You can choose.
And in fact,
we choose both all the time. Right?
this is why Judas is such a tragic figure.
But Jesus is always there.
Right.
What do you choose?
Jesus
to
is
choose?
offering Judas the bread, and Judas is going out into the night.
Right.
Eat the bread.
Right. He's eating the bread in the night, and he's not getting it. But that's it. I mean, people who live in hell, and you can see them because they turned inward instead of outward. They've rejected the invitation to love. I'm not talking about the invitation to institutional belonging. I'm talking about what is at the heart of this text and at the heart of faith. We live it out in community in particular ways because it's really hard to just kind of make it up as you go along without other people. But ultimately, this is not about following the rules, or it's about either receiving the gift that is always on offer, or turning away from it. That's how I hear Jesus talking about it. I think it is Judas.
And Matthew, I'm sorry. I think it helps us also to remember that even people that we feel are wrong, that they're still loved.
Right? I think the preacher's going to say something about that in a little bit.
But I was thinking even like in the political sense. that
Yes.
we need to remember that they're still loved too.
Right. That's kind of what I was getting
That
at.
is, they might make us.
That's kind of what I was getting at earlier this morning and later this morning. Finally, there's this. It's time. I got to go put my dress on. Just tell Frank that we got halfway through 14. We got through the way, the truth, and the life. And the great. I'm just going to leave you with the script because other people say things better than I do. Eugene Peterson. The way Eugene Peterson frames this is when you live the Jesus truth in the Jesus way, you get the Jesus life. And I like that. That's where the goods are at. Okay, thank you, everybody. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. And maybe we'll see some of you online in worship.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew.
All right. Tell me your name again.
Sherry.
Sherry. I'm so glad you came to class today.
Good